Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and we are happy to have you here today. A fun one on tap for us, looking ahead to a Georgia scrimmage on Saturday, perhaps among the more pivotal moments of Georgia's preseason preparation. We'll talk to you about that. Jeff Sentell stops by to talk about UGA recruiting. We'll also take a deep dive, an examination, if you will, on a Georgia player that, I got to confess, was not on my radar at all, who seems to be generating a good bit of positive buzz thus far during fall camp. What is it all about? What does it all mean? We're going to talk about that. And one of the sort of more prominent names in media has made an interesting prediction about Georgia, which allows us to circle back on a topic that we were discussing a couple of days ago in terms of what really matters and what perhaps doesn't for the Dogs in their quest for another national championship this season. So it is a busy and very full show. We're glad to have you with us for it. I'll also see you tonight on the Peachtree Sports Network for high school football. Excited about that. Corky Kill Dave Hunter Classic. So what do you say we get ready to get what is legitimately a football weekend started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You and I likely will not be able to see it, but something big is going to go down this weekend for Georgia as it puts the pieces together for its 2024 season. I, of course, am talking about the scrimmage, the second of these summer scrimmages for Georgia, kind of as Kirby Smart sort of said, kind of the conclusion to fall camp in many ways. On the other side of this, it's time to start getting ready for Clemson. But these are those sort of final moments for Georgia, having worked on itself and doing its sort of self-scouting, installation, the kind of fall camp portion of these August practices. All of that, in many ways, kind of comes to a head on Saturday in Sanford Stadium as Georgia hosts another one of these summer scrimmages. And the interesting backdrop around all of this is, and I'll be completely honest with you, it sort of feels like we do the same show. You kind of mark time by doing sort of the same show a lot. It feels like we've been here before in terms of, Georgia goes into a scrimmage needing a better performance than it had last week because of some concerns that were expressed by the effort and the acclimation to the heat and all of that kind of stuff for Georgia. Doesn't it feel like we've sort of had that conversation in the past before for UGA? I'm not certainly downplaying the need to make this a good scrimmage for Georgia on Saturday. It just sort of feels like this is well-traveled ground for us, where there were some concerns coming out of Georgia after the first scrimmage and a need to improve as you move into scrimmage two. Feels like we've been there before, but obviously that's probably kind of an important rite of passage as you get ready for an upcoming season. So let's set the stage in appropriate fashion here today in terms of what will happen for Georgia on Saturday. Let me start with Kirby Smart, who, when he met with the media on Tuesday, looking back to what had happened in scrimmage one on Saturday, was pretty clear that while I think it's fair to say he's been pretty happy with his team overall thus far this calendar year, into the summer, into fall camp, while I think that Smart sees a lot to like about this team, on this particular day, the scrimmage last Saturday, apparently Kirby Smart was not happy at all. This is how Smart told that on Tuesday.
Progress has been good. Wouldn't say that the first scrimmage was really up to the standard or our expectations. We did not have a lot of enthusiasm, didn't play to the level that I think we need to play to. But good news is I got another chance this Saturday and really every day to go out and practice.
It's one of the most important questions you'll ask any football player, any football team. How do you respond to adversity? Now, I'd say lackluster first scrimmage is sort of a lowercase version of adversity. There's real, honest-to-goodness adversity that strikes during a season where either you're forced to confront an injury or you're forced in a year like this, against a schedule like this, to maybe even bounce back after a loss. You have to consider that to at least be a possibility for Georgia this season. And understanding all of that, how do you respond to that adversity? Well, in its own way, as much as it can be before the season begins, Georgia has a chance to kind of answer back and strike back after some fingers were pointed by Smart last week to say your enthusiasm wasn't good enough, your performance wasn't good enough, your level of energy wasn't good enough. It all needs to be better here right now. So how does Georgia step up and perform better with all of that at stake and all of that on the line for this upcoming Saturday? I thought it was interesting that one of Georgia's key leaders, Chaz Chambliss, the outside linebacker, he met with the media yesterday. And in terms of what Georgia does to sort of show that it's better, show itself, by the way, that it's better than its performance in the previous scrimmage last Saturday, Chaz Chambliss in the podium yesterday kind of gave his thoughts, his message, maybe directly to his teammates, a challenge to go out there and be better this week than you were a week ago. And Chambliss described in his own mind exactly how he thinks that would look. This is what Chaz Chambliss said yesterday.
I want to see growth from the first scrimmage to the second scrimmage. Obviously, we haven't the first scrimmage was the first time we put pads on since Frank. That's a long time to go without live tackling. It's a lot of time to go without actually going into a game-like simulation and going from last week into this week. We just want to see everybody be freer, be looser, play the game like how they want to play, and just be physical and tough and out-compete, out-hustle, and be able to how our defense wants to be.
So that's what Chaz Chambliss says he wants, and this is one of the reasons why, in addition to being a major on-field contributor for Georgia, this is one of the reasons why Chambliss has great value to this program, is because he's been around, he understands how to articulate that message, and no doubt, he and the other Georgia players are trying to sort of set a similar tone. No doubt you got to imagine their Georgia teammates are listening very closely in on that, and, making sure they are ready to kind of go out there and do just that. So let's talk here for a second about, okay, well, what exactly would that look like? If Georgia's going to have a better second scrimmage, if those of us who are Georgia fans who won't be there in attendance, but we're listening very closely for the things that we will be hearing, what are the things that we'll be listening for as a way of saying, yeah, you know what, after 2 weeks' worth of these summer scrimmages, you feel a lot better now than you perhaps would have felt after last week's scrimmage. So let's talk about a couple of these things here for a moment. First of all, and this is not really related to what Chambliss was saying, but I do think it's one of the bigger things that's out there. I think you're looking to hear, is Georgia getting healthier at a couple of key spots? For instance, right now, I believe last Saturday we're told that Georgia was performing on its offensive line without Jared Wilson, the center. And while it seems like Georgia's got a pretty capable guy in Tate Ratledge who seems pretty comfortable snapping the football and kind of moving over from his guard spot, and when he moves over, Georgia now has two elite guards. When Ratledge is there, you've got one of the best guards in the entire country. If Ratledge moves to center, all of a sudden now you kind of find a home for both Dylan Fairchild and Micah Morris. We think Fairchild may be the starter at left guard. Morris is one of those guys that's probably one of the better interior offensive linemen in the entire country. Not obvious, though, that he has a guaranteed starting spot at Georgia, we would say, but certainly good enough to have one of those. So it's almost like you solve a problem with where to put Micah Morris if Tate Ratledge slides over to center. And so a lot of people might be looking around and saying, hey, I kind of like this Georgia offensive line. If Fairchild and Morris are my two guards, if Tate Ratledge, who's, obviously one of the most respected interior offensive linemen in college football, if he's my center, the bookends at tackle, all of a sudden that feels like a pretty good group to a lot of people. But I'll remind you, though, is that if you want to go back to the spring, one of the most praised Georgia players, in fact, we almost kind of laughed about just the degree to which Jared Wilson was earning praise for what he was doing during spring practice for Georgia. This is a guy who we would say is very comfortable at the center position. And I think hearing that he was back to full health and back to being able to perform, or at least something close to full health, close enough to kind of be out there during the scrimmage, if he's able to be that guy, and we think that offensive line is sort of a chemistry-based position group, players don't just play well, they learn to play well with each other, getting Wilson back out there for what he's able to do, and what that also means for your additional depth, where one of those two guards is, pretty clearly a guy that you trust to put into a game. Monroe Freeling, who's probably a backup offensive tackle right now, he may be a guy that you trust to put in the game. One of those incoming freshmen, such as Daniel Calhoun, he may also eventually be one of those guys too. That adding Wilson back into the mix gives you the guy that I think is the player best equipped to be Georgia center, but it also just adds to the overall number of capable contributors you have there along the offensive line, that's one of those things that I think you'd want to hear coming out of the scrimmage. I think you'd probably also want to hear, even if we don't get absolute confirmation on this, there's always going to be a rumor mill. I think one of the things you'd like to hear is that we're getting a little closer to resolution on some of Georgia's most interesting position battles. And I would say that right now, for me, a lot of that centers on the defensive secondary, where it seems like Dalen Everett right now, because of his experience, it seems like maybe he is in line to have one of those starting spots to begin the year. But who's the other starter over there? I mean, is it Julian Humphrey? Is it Daniel Harris? I guess there were people who said that Humphrey got the nod over Harris to go along with Everett for the first, team defense to begin the scrimmage last Saturday. Does that continue? Is Harris like the equal to Humphrey? Are they in a situation where they have to rotate those guys? How does Ellis Robinson factor into all of that? Robinson, if you care about individual recruiting rankings and things like that, one of the highest rated players that Georgia's ever signed. How close is he to being in the category of a Harris and a Humphrey along with an Everett in terms of the cornerbacks that Georgia trusts? What's going on at that safety spot opposite of Malachi Stark's got the one safety spot locked down. The other safety spot opposite of that, is this the thing where KJ Bolden as an incoming freshman is just too much of a rising star to be denied? And is he in line to be a starter right away? Or is Dan Jackson, who we've been told, you talk to people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, they'll tell you that Jackson seemingly has had a pretty good camp here, so much so that maybe he, at this phase of his career, veteran presence, guy who's played some good football for Georgia and played just a significant number of snaps for Georgia, that at least in the early stages of the season, maybe he is someone that you can't keep off the field. Do we get some sort of resolution in that? Janelle Aguero trying to be that star, that nickelback, the fifth defensive back, a defensive look that Georgia probably plays 50-something, 60% of the time. That means that a guy like Aguero would be on the field a lot. He's trying to hold off Ja'Cory Thomas there for that. Is he indeed capable of doing that? And do we get that resolution that's indeed what's happening there? Those are just some of the things that we'll be watching when it comes to that scrimmage on Saturday. And then the final thing I'll say is also another chance for someone to kind of emerge as, did you hear about so-and-so? And did you hear what so-and-so did during Georgia's scrimmage or during practice? There's always a very robust rumor mill around what goes on with these Georgia practices. And the fact that so few people get to see them only make the rumors and innuendo more enticing when we do hear them. And that's why it travels sometimes so fast with wherever you gather with your social media platform of choice or your message board of choice or here at our comment section on our shows, that wherever you go, you're just going to hear a lot of that because those eyewitness accounts of what actually happens with these practices and these scrimmages, it's just so precious. Will we hear about another guy apparently impressing behind the scenes, creating some of those wait till you see so-and-so in a game type comments? That's one of the other things that would be fun about the second scrimmage for Georgia on Saturday, living up to the challenge that a guy like Chaz Chambliss gave to his teammates in the clip that you heard a moment ago, which, by the way, there may actually be a fairly interesting Georgia player starting to create some of that kind of buzz, and it was a name that perhaps we never quite would have expected to be in a conversation like that, but it's a conversation that seems to be continuing. Who is that player? We'll tell you more about that here coming up in a moment, but first, let me take some time to introduce today's show. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're happy to have you with us. We wish you a happy weekend as you get ready to roll into that, one of our final weekends without college football. And obviously, it's a football weekend in and of itself because we've got you tonight for the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic and, of course, high school football all across our state. We wish all of those teams well and plenty of health and safety and all kinds of fun stuff as the 2024 season begins. We're so excited about that. Our friends at Kroger are excited about that there as well. And they're getting ready for all the tailgate stuff and things like that, but also those final days of summer grilling season, they want you to enjoy that too. You want your fresh summer faves? You can get that right now at Kroger for pickup or delivery when you stop by and shop in store at your local Kroger or online at Kroger.com. So happy to have Kroger as a part of DawgNation Daily here today. Also looking forward to having Jeff Sentell on the program here coming up in a moment. And while I have some time, let me also give you a little bit of a shout out here there as well for the really fun stuff going down for us as that 2024 season inches closer. If you haven't gotten your tickets yet, you're getting down to the wire here for our DawgNation Invasion tailgate to kick off the season against Clemson. We're actually going to talk a little bit about that game before we're done on today's show. Kind of an interesting thought I was having on my way into work this morning about the game right now that we're so excited about to kick off the 2024 season. And we're kicking off it in style with our DawgNation Invasion tailgate, just steps away from Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's a breakfast-themed tailgate. That means mimosas and Bloody Marys and sort of like bacon sausage, pastries, muffins, all that kind of stuff. And for the first 250 to sign up, you also get your DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. Now, if you want to talk the traditional like beer, wine, cocktails, of course, you can get all that too. But it's going to be an amazing tailgate, kind of a breakfast-themed tailgate leading into the noon start for Georgia against Clemson. And you can get, if you're one of the first 250 to sign up on that, the DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. So please go to DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. That's DawgNation.com/tailgate. Secure your ticket today. And if you want to, the night before the game, how about our friends at Discover Dunwoody offering you the VIP experience where you get a chance to stay in a wonderful hotel right here in the Dunwoody area, which is right near where we do the show each and every day. We're going to do that for you at the Hyatt Place Perimeter Center the night before the game. Then the next morning, you don't have to worry about parking. You don't have to worry about driving. You'll travel from your hotel to the side of the tailgate in a luxury motor coach. You'll enjoy the tailgate. You'll watch the game, and then you'll get on the bus and come back to Dunwoody after that. Of course, you'll be a part of the DawgNation Invasion tailgate. You'll get the swag back from our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips, which includes the DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. It's a VIP experience kind of on top of the DawgNation Invasion tailgate that I know you're already so excited about. So to register now for that VIP hotel stay, luxury motor coach transportation, go to our friends at atlsportstrips.com for more on that. That's atlsportstrips.com for more on that. All right, we're going to get Jeff Sentell here coming up in a couple of minutes. A lot to do with him as it relates to UGA recruiting, including a look at Justice Terry and the five-star defensive lineman, a recent conversation that he had here with our friends at DawgNation. So we'll do that here coming up in just a little bit. Prior to that, though, I'm going to go around the doghouse. And around the doghouse today is presented by our friends at Zagoria Law. Glad to have them with us as always. And I said this just a moment ago, that one of the fun things that could come out of Saturday as a way of sort of feeling like Georgia took another step forward towards the upcoming season with how it performs during its second scrimmage, do we, those of us who try to keep our ear to the ground, do we hear whispers of, oh, gosh, did you hear what so-and-so has done? Did you hear about this? That would be one of those things, another kind of potential head-turning, breakout-type performance in a scrimmage would be one of those things that makes that kind of fun. Now, we may have an example of some of that coming from Georgia Fall Camp right now. And as a way of setting this up, I'm going to give you a total confession here for a moment. Obviously, I am immersed in Georgia football, much the same way many of you are. But even with that immersion, even with that kind of devotion, just, obsession almost with everything that goes on with Georgia football, even with that, I don't know if you're like me, maybe you're not, but there are still occasionally some Georgia players who just don't always stay very top of mind for me, that because of how deep this roster is and how many guys we talk about, sometimes there's just not enough bandwidth to sort of think about everybody and talk about everybody. And we may be guilty at times of not giving some players as much credit as we should on this show just because, ADD or whatever else, we're just always kind of focused on 1,000 different things at once. And sometimes there are Georgia players who sort of slip through the cracks, who kind of fall, between the cushions, if you will, of getting the attention they deserve. Maybe an example of this, Quintavius Johnson, a player that Georgia signed in the class of 2024 out of Mays. I would have, seen Johnson in person, but I have almost no memory of this. I did not really think much about Johnson when he signed with Georgia. It's just not a guy, and this is not his fault. It's my fault. But if I'm just being honest, and I try to be as candid with all of you as I can, Johnson is not really a guy who has been on my radar very much. Played quarterback in high school. He's an edge rusher for Georgia. My goodness, there are a lot of whispers out there right now of, did you hear what Quintavius Johnson, or as they call him, Q Johnson, did you hear what he's been doing during Georgia practice? Did you hear what he's been doing during this fall camp here, making a case for himself to perhaps deserve some playing time? Now, I'm going to give you an example of this based on what Todd Hartley, the Georgia tight ends coach, would have said. And the reason why Hartley's opinion matters on this is because, obviously, Hartley's tight ends are oftentimes battling against the Georgia edge rushers, the outside linebackers, during practice. But after you hear this from Hartley, I also want to try to make something abundantly clear, that patient zero for the Q Johnson buzz is not Hartley. Hartley, in many ways, confirmed it. But, y'all, I'm here to tell you, and some of you know, some of you have those relationships with people, as I like to say, who know somebody, who knows somebody, who knows somebody, who saw practice or was there for this or whatever else. Those people have been talking about, as they call him, Q Johnson now for quite some time. It's been one of the really interesting rumors of the summer because for someone like me, as I said before, if I'm just being honest, and it's my dereliction of duty, I guess, Quintavius Johnson just not a player that I have thought all that much about. But starting now, we're going to be thinking a lot more about him perhaps and his chance for maybe playing for Georgia here this year, partially based on something that Todd Hartley said a few days ago. It almost kind of got lost in the shuffle of everything else Hartley said, but it's worth reflecting on more based on other stuff that's also out there. This is Todd Hartley talking about Quintavius Johnson.
I mean, I've been pleasantly surprised with Q Johnson. He had some tape, high school tape of him playing quarterback. And one of the things you look at in trying to find a tight end sometimes is, sometimes these high school kids don't always play tight end. You're like, man, this guy, I know Chadero wants him in his room, but I'll take him in my room. Like, he's athletic, and surprisingly for a freshman, he has not been overwhelmed, as much with what our defense is trying to do, scheme-wise, schematically. Not that I can tell. Chadero might give you a different story of that too, but very, very impressed.
I love Todd Hartley because do you get the same vibe that I do, which is like Hartley's a very successful coach, certainly the top coach at his position and one of the top young rising stars in the coaching profession overall. And yet in a clip like that, he just sort of sounds like a football fan, just a guy that likes watching the sport. He obviously participates in it professionally, but he also just likes watching, good football take place. And he's sort of evaluating Johnson in this case from just the perspective of a football fan of, I've seen this guy and I really like what he kind of brings to the table. And then he puts his coaching hat back on to say, I could probably find a way to use him as a tight end around here too. It's just kind of an interesting kind of, I guess, dichotomy of I don't want to say personalities, but of roles for Hartley. Someone who obviously speaks as a coach, but also out there at practice every day, just loves the game and likes watching guys embrace the game and grow in it. And that's what he says that Q Johnson's doing. But once again, it would be wrong to say, boy, there's all this buzz around Q Johnson because of what Todd Hartley said. Y'all, people behind the scenes have been talking about this dude now for a good little while. And what Hartley said kind of only confirms that, if you will, that this is just one of those things of, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of, and it's a different position, obviously even a different side of the ball, but kind of prior to 2021, what people were saying about A.D. Mitchell a little bit. Now, I'm not telling you that Q Johnson is about to go out there and have an A.D. Mitchell-like impact for the Georgia defense, because oftentimes this preseason buzz, if we're just being honest, sometimes it ends up being unrequited. Sometimes it ends up being a false positive. Over the course of years, and some of y'all have been around the block a bunch of times too, all the players who were like, oh my gosh, this guy's turning heads during fall camp. The number of players for whom that's been true, it ended up really not being much of a factor during the fall. Obviously, we know that can be a relatively long list. Right now, good things being said about Q Johnson. For a little bit more on that, the other day, Jalen Walker obviously lines up next to Johnson a lot during practice. He was sort of asked kind of what he'd seen from Q. I thought it was at least worth hearing Jalen Walker on this topic as well.
Say this, Q to me, was just a great athlete overall. I just decided to see him grow up. We had since the spring, just seeing his strides to become a better player throughout the year. So I'm just accomplished and proud of him.
I think what Walker says there is reflective of, I think, what a lot of people are saying right now, which is whatever is going on for Q seems to be happening pretty fast, that it's a quick development kind of in rapid succession here in terms of adding those layers of becoming the kind of player that Georgia might find some way to use here this fall, which is interesting because we already sort of think of that outside linebacker spot for Georgia, what we call kind of the edge rush position now. We kind of already think of that being a pretty deep position group and maybe even more depth now in the person of Quintavius Johnson being a participant in all of that. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, we love Zagoria Law because they have specialized in something that, frankly, if you have to deal with this or if someone you love has dealt with this, a very traumatic thing, and it's frustrating because it's almost always because of someone else's error or someone else's, I guess, just irresponsibility that something like this could occur. If you or someone you love have been bitten by a dog that's not yours, well, obviously you deserve some compensation for that, and you want to trust the law group in Georgia that has specialized in that. And frankly, it's one of the most interesting, I guess, categories of law, and the fact that they're kind of the only folks here in our state that have chosen to sort of specialize in this particular field of service, representing people who've been bitten by dogs. They literally wrote the book on this kind of legal representation, and they want to serve you here in all of this there as well. So if you or someone you loved has been hurt by somebody else's dog, you need to give my friends at Zagoria Law a call here. You can call them 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's dog spelled the conventional way, by the way, D-O-G. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That's Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com, to find out more about what they can do for you if you've been bitten by a dog or if someone you love is going to have that situation. Get the compensation you deserve and the protection you deserve with our friends at Zagoria Law, bringing Around the Doghouse to us here today. All right, before we're done, one of the most prominent voices in all of college football has made kind of an interesting prediction about Georgia for the upcoming season. But how much does it really matter? We'll debate all of that before we conclude today's program. But for now, everything going on in the world of UGA recruiting, including a big conversation with a five-star defensive lineman. Busy time here around Dog Nation. Jeff Sentell will get us up to date on all of it here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will say hello to Jeff Sentell here, presented by our friends on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger today. Obviously, a lot happening around UGA recruiting. Fun conversation that Jeff was able to have this week with the five-star defensive lineman, Justice Terry. Jeff, I guess let me start there with that. This is, along with Elijah Griffin, similar position, one of those big names that Georgia fans continue to have really no shortage of interest in. So for those who maybe haven't gotten a chance to see the video that's on the Dog Nation YouTube page involving Terry or anything like that, give us a little bit of a preview of that. How did you find Mr. Terry when you had a chance to speak to him once again this week?
Brandon, I think the word there I would use is very interesting. In reporter school, I guess, things you learn over the years is when you know the question, when you know the answer to the question and you have to ask it, the answer itself is not very interesting, because I know Justice Terry's told me he's going to take this thing out to December. He's going to run that marathon in terms of his recruiting. He said he's made 2 commitments so far. He thought both of them were a little hasty, and now he's going to ride this one out. So as a reporter, what I tried to do there is just trying to figure out how he thinks. And people are much more comfortable and candid when you ask them how they're feeling, what they think about things, rather than the question that they know they're going to get. And I thought one of the most revealing parts of that segment, we've had 2 with Justice. One of them was the more pertinent, the news stuff, the nuts and bolts for the short-term thinking. And this last one we posted, which was on before the Hedges on Wednesday, it was more about what's going to move the dial for him in his recruitment. And I think the first question on there, I was able to capture something there with Justice, because for forever, Brandon, I've been talking to him about, hey, what's it going to be like if potentially you're on the same defensive line in college? with Elijah Griffin? A lot of times I ask that question, and Terry was the guy that was committed to Georgia, and Griffin was the undecided recruit. Well, now the question gets a little more interesting with another layer, and I'm talking about Isaiah Gibson. And one of the things I asked him that I thought was one of the more telling moments of that piece, Brandon, was I said, what's it going to be like if you end up on the same line with not only Elijah Griffin, undecided just as Terry, but now committed Isaiah Gibson? And he expanded his thought. He said the words unstoppable. He said it would mean something because everybody was from the same home state. And then, Brandon, he lumped in Zayden Walker as well. Another single A, standout Georgia high school, 5-star defensive type player. And there's only one place where all those players are going to play together, Brandon, and that's the University of Georgia.
Really interesting stuff. And obviously for a lot of Georgia fans, if I took the temperature of them right now on Terry, I think the feeling here is, despite the fact that Terry's not committed and despite the fact that he's still several months away from kind of making that final, I think a lot of Georgia fans have some confidence here about Georgia's ability to win this recruiting battle and the likelihood that maybe Georgia will do that. But there's also this thought of, well, the longer this goes kind of on the open market, so to speak, the more the opportunity exists for something to step up and kind of change the current trajectory on all of that. So let me kind of ask you here to kind of, I guess, give me the other side of this here for a moment. If I'm a Georgia fan and I'm feeling good about Terry, but I've got to wait until December to have him make that official, what should I be worried about taking place sometime over the course of the next few months that would make this feel different than it does right now for some Georgia fans?
It's a good question. Brandon, let me speak the King's English here with you. And maybe this will sound a little like old school OG DawgNation Daily days gone by. I would say that both Terry and Griffin are not quite in that Malik Herring phase where it was the most committed, undecided recruit in the country, because I don't think those guys are like that. But to answer your question bluntly, Brandon, I don't know about you, I was kind of stunned to see the number that's floated around this week regarding Josh Petty.
Yeah.
Now, Josh Petty is a guy that I think that's something Georgia Tech has to do. I think they have to spend those type of collective dollars in order to bring in a player like that. The curious part for me there, Brandon, though, and I'll use that word curious a little slyly, is that you've got a guy here that's still undersized, still playing Class 1A football, and that was still dealing with a hip injury for most of the summer. And if you're telling me the market dictates that a Josh Petty is worth $800,000 per year annually at least, I think the game changer, the potential game wrecker, is if an entity comes in and decides, well, because it is a free market, Brandon, you're worth what somebody says you're worth. So what if somebody says Justice Terry or Elijah Griffin is worth $1.5 million a year or $2 million a year or 1.3? These numbers are out there in the sphere in terms of big time prospects now. I think David Sanders Jr., who will make his decision on Saturday, those are the type of numbers that I think David Sanders Jr. will command in the NL sphere these days. So how could it change? How could things maybe differ or take a step away from everybody feels real good about Terry, everybody feels real good about Griffin, at least as good as anyone? Those are the potential game wreckers for those decisions right there.
So you mentioned Georgia Tech a moment ago. They're also maybe thought to be a team that could benefit from the, I would say, surprising decommitment of Christian Garrett from Georgia a couple of days ago. Obviously, Garrett's Prince Avenue team got an impressive win last night in the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic over a much higher classification team in West Forsyth. But in terms of the Garrett news, I guess, what was your reaction to the fact that Garrett does decommit from Georgia? And is this an example, much like what we were rumored to have heard about, not even rumored, it was reported, that Josh Petty got big dollars from Georgia Tech? Is this Tech also throwing around some big dollars to Christian Garrett to get him to decommit from Georgia? Is that what went down here?
I feel like that is, Brandon. Let me give you some facts here, and I'll let the viewer, reader, our audience member draw their own conclusion. When Garrett made this move, I was told a pretty reputable source here that better opportunity, better options arrived there for Christian Garrett. Christian Garrett, Brandon, let's go back to his recruiting story. It was a great story. He visited Clemson, then he visited Georgia, and then he's like, I'm done. I don't need to make any more decisions. I spoke to his family afterward, and this was kind of a long time coming. The family is full of Georgia fans. His mother told me a great story about one special Christmas when she got Christian a decked out Georgia bedroom suit. That was like the fat head. That was like the sheets. That was everything from A to Z. And that was still up in his room at the time of his decision. And now you have something like this. I got to call it, Brandon, I'm going to use a football term, sudden change in his recruitment. And sudden change in my mind is if you see Tech is willing to pay that much amount of money to induce a player to come join their program. Class 1A, Brandon, if we're being honest, simply honest, Garrett's football ability and his skill set right now to come play right away quickly is much greater at Georgia Tech than in Athens, and it's also much greater than Josh Petty. I not only look at what Tech is trying to do, and hey, good for them. They're trying to make themselves relevant, or even more relevant. They're trying to win that mighty ACC. But for them to go find guys, and I would even, Brandon, my thoughts here even lean towards the Mola agenda at a Duluth, who they recently picked up as well. I can't see a world where you give that money to Christian Garrett. Again, just being honest, this is my honest opinion. Where you give that amount of money to Josh Petty, and then you have guys in the state of Georgia, prominent players at the University of Georgia offered and recruited. You're going to have to spread some of those dollars around, because let's be very careful about this. One of the things you're going to do when you have to throw this amount of inducement around to bring in players, you better be right, Brandon, because if you throw this money at a player that doesn't play right away or has to wait, and maybe he's not starting until the middle of the redshirt freshman year or their second year on campus, I don't think that's money well spent. And it also is going to create a lot of hangover and a lot of collateral, my friend, in terms of, okay, you get Josh Petty this year, you get Christian Garrett the next year. Now, what are you going to recruit in the 2026 class? You're going to have to come with those same types of figures. So while we saw with Texas A&M, it's okay to shoot your shot, it's okay to pony up that check, but you better be right on the evaluation and the ability to really help your football team quickly. Otherwise, it gets upside down.
And obviously in the case of Petty, I mean, if people who follow recruiting very closely will know, and this is maybe fair, maybe it's not, but the one knock on him is his size. A lot of people wonder, is he big enough? Can he maintain enough weight to be a big-time offensive lineman? I think that's one of the reasons why the recruitment around him has been a little bit interesting, is because I think there are some teams that are kind of wondering, okay, what is his actual size and what kind of weight will he be able to maintain at the college level? Whether that's fair or not, that seems to be what the conversation is about. But in the case of Garrett, Jeff, whether it's Georgia Tech or not, this to me just sort of speaks to the challenge that I think exists for Georgia. And Smart talked the other day about like the deterioration of football and not being able to get the kind of depth he feels like he should be able to get. This to me, this is a perfect example of that, which is that, Georgia wants Terry, may get him. They want Elijah Griffin, may get him. But they also want other defensive linemen as well. And just getting enough defensive linemen to feel like you're sort of fully filled out when it comes to the depth at that premium position, it's just really, really hard to do, because somebody who wants them more than you, maybe needs them more than you, whoever it is, whether it's a guy in the 2025 class like Garrett or names in the 2024 class that we talked about, there's just always going to be an opportunity for a team to sort of swoop in, act more desperate than you, and end up winning that recruiting battle, which becomes easy to explain in and of itself. But over the course of the long haul, you're just getting fewer defensive linemen maybe into the program than you would have gotten in previous years, because everybody wants this incredibly scarce position, and some programs are maybe just going to demonstrate they may want it more than you in that particular moment.
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of full circle look at all that, Brandon, because like number one, I just look at the amount of defensive linemen that Georgia has brought in over the last Brandon, let's just isolate it to the 2024 class and the 2025 potential class. So I just kind of look at it like where Christian Garrett would fit in. So if Georgia brings in this sphere, in this 2025 class, if Georgia brings in Justice Terry eventually, and that would be very well welcomed around DawgNation. If they bring in Elijah Griffin, what about J.J. Henney, a guy that you look at and you see clear first-round traits? Well, when you look at Christian Garrett, I see a vital part of any SEC defense, a really good run defender on first and second down. But does he have those clear first-round traits like a J.J. Henney would, or a Justice Terry would, or Elijah Griffin would? My evaluation there is no. I think he's more of a round 2, round 3 type guy. And then you look at who Georgia brought in last year, Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. You look at, again, you keep going down the list, Jordan Thomas. I think it's Christian here making probably the best decision he can for his future, not just in terms of, collectives or whatever, inducements. You've got a chance here to play a lot quicker at Tech, to be a mainstay a lot quicker at Tech than you do at a place like Georgia, because we started rattling off those names, Brandon, and Christian Garrett might go into Georgia. He might be a 2-year starter at Georgia, Brandon, and that's a great thing to say, but it's going to take a while for him to get to that level, and he's going to have to fight through names like that. Even a guy like Nnamdi Oboko, those are guys that are going to be in his way before he would have a chance to play and really shine in Athens. And I think this is an example here, more of kind of, you could say you bet on yourself at Georgia, but you also bet on those quick and early reps as well to help you develop at the same time, because it's going to be loaded across that defensive front, Brandon. The teams to come in Georgia look to be one of the toughest 2 deeps to crack since Kirby Smart has been in Athens.
We had Jontae Gilbert on the Peachtree Sports Network on Wednesday. Douglas got a very impressive win in the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic. Gilbert had a touchdown on the offensive side during that game. Getting a chance to spend a little time around the Douglas program, certainly an example of, Dante Williams, T-Rob coming in, especially in the case of Robinson, I guess in this case, having a previous relationship with Stanley Pritchett, the Douglas coach. Sort of an example to me of these new defensive backs coaches kind of making quick relationships, maybe, I guess, reforming some of those relationships that a guy like Gilbert would have had with Georgia, probably better with the new staff than maybe it would have been with the previous staff for whatever reason. It seems like Gilbert also impressed Georgia in some of his recent workouts there, showing that maybe he can play the cornerback position in college. What did you make of the Jontae Gilbert commitment, and what do you think Georgia is getting in Gilbert?
Good stuff there. Let me see if I can answer all this with one quick story. Brandon, you know how I'm going to try and make an example out of this, and like would be you watching a Braves baseball game. What I mean by that is Dante Williams was recruiting Jontae Gilbert, and T-Rob was as well when they were both at Alabama and they were at USC. And let's say those guys take the outing into the 7th and 8th inning in terms of getting Georgia a long way down the road with Jontae Gilbert. And the thing Jontae Gilbert had to show Georgia, because he had professed a preference, he wanted to play corner. Well, Georgia had to see him work. They had to see him flip his hips. They had to see the speed term. They had to see the way with his length he would play the position. I think it's going to look a lot like Keely Ringo did in Athens, Brandon. But one of the main things he had to do, Brandon, is he had to run for Georgia. And he ran for Georgia back in May 31st, I believe. Right at the end of May, he ran a 4.5. And that, all of a sudden, Georgia was the school. They didn't make his top 12, I believe. Didn't make his top 7. But then they made his final 2. And really what cinched it, Brandon, was the closer. Kirby Smart came in at the cookout, and he told him, he's like, been watching your game. We like how you're performing. T-Rob even dropped in the nugget that he reminds him of J.C. Horn, another product that came out of Atlanta, went to the SEC at South Carolina and became a first-round pick. And when Gilbert heard those things from T-Rob, he heard those things from Kirby Smart, that cinched it for him and closed out the deal with him in Georgia.
Really fun to consider there on that. Obviously a busy weekend for high school football here coming up as we wrap up. Give me a couple of things you might be watching for, players that you're looking forward to seeing. What's on tap for you as the high school football season begins and really in earnest all across the state here this weekend?
Yeah, Brandon, we've already seen a lot. We've seen a lot of early action. I know you were calling a bunch of games, and I think not only did you see Jontae Gilbert at Jontae Gilbert at Douglas, Atlanta, but you also saw a really talented player in terms of Casey Varner, the 2028 athlete. Now, folks, I'm not going to. I understand the audience. I can read the room. Nobody wants to hear about 2028s, but this is a 2028 that folks will get used to hearing his name a lot. I think he's going to be a national top 15, top 20 level recruit. Already loves the Dogs. The Dogs already offered. They're in good shape here. Brandon, tonight for me, I've got my eye on Westlake versus Langston Hughes. That's a pair of Georgia commitments there. Of course, there's Big One Gaston for the Westlake Lions. And then there's, on the other side, Donnie Glover for Langston Hughes. Those guys might even get some mano-a-mano action because Donnie Glover might play a little bit on the other side of the ball as well, not just in his normal tackle, interior offensive line, center position for Hughes. Another game that's really intriguing, Brandon, and we've already written about two of these players that I'll be watching this weekend in the Dome. Douglas County High School, Brandon. I know I could probably see your eyes rolled. I want to know if you're ready to go down this road again. But Georgia had a really remarkable surge with Aaron Gregory. They went from 0 to substantial in about a month and a half this summer, where Aaron Gregory now says he went from 0 contact with Georgia over the summer to now he hears it as much from the Bulldogs as any school, right up there with Texas A&M, right up there with Tennessee, two schools that have been recruiting him for a long time. And here's where it gets a little spicy, Brandon. It's an in-state receiver. It's the number 4 receiver in the country. And here they are, the Dogs, trying to keep one of these playmakers home. And then to just double the pleasure here on that same Douglas County roster, we'll save the talk about a 6'9" offensive tackle for another day. That's just a sophomore. But on that same wide receiver room, I'm told, coming off a fractured wrist he suffered in summer camp, that Devin Carter, the transfer from Cedar Grove, will try to give it a go this weekend also for Douglas County. And Devin is the son of FSU great and NFL legacy Dexter Carter. Brandon, he is also very special in a different way than Aaron Gregory. And I know how everybody loves that forbidden fruit, which would be a near 5-star Peach State wide receiver, and the chances for Kirby Smart and James Coley to reel those guys into Georgia. But that's the task, that's the effort there. And again, Dexter Carter or Aaron Gregory, I wrote it this way, Brandon, because this is how I feel. You would see Kirby Smart and James Coley dancing like Deadpool in the latest Deadpool Wolverine movie, listening to NSYNC. That's how happy the Dogs would be if they could sign either one of those two dudes in the 2026 class.
Really fascinating stuff, Jeff. Appreciate that. Enjoy your coverage of high school football and Georgia recruiting here over the course of the next few days. And we will look forward to getting our chance to talk to you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger again very soon as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Take it easy, Brandon. Have a good weekend, sir. Have a good call as well.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Fun to have high school football back all across the state of Georgia, and very excited about seeing that Douglas County Cedar Grove matchup that Jeff was previewing there. Saturday night, that'll be our conclusion of all of our games for the entirety of the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic, and that quartet of games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We'll see you there for that there on Saturday night. Going to be a great time. And let me tell you what else is a great time. That is a trip cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and exciting Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, such as the one you can take on board Utopia of the Seas. Now, you know we got a DawgNation cruise coming up, but here's my encouragement to you. Y'all, don't wait until April of 2025 to take your next Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Listen, I'd love to be able to say I could take one prior to then. I think we may have a chance to do that. I don't know. We're certainly trying to figure out as a family if we can find a way to sort of get away and do all of that. It's just fun to plan. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to think about all of the great things happening on board when you're talking about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, all the really cool things that Utopia of the Seas has to offer. Like, you know, for instance, think about like the Royal Railway, that brand new restaurant concept on board Utopia of the Seas, which is almost like being in a theme park or something like that, because you're in the rail car and you're kind of rolling through the American West. You get the great, you know, food, and you get the great show that sort of takes place around that. just one of the cool things that Royal Caribbean does. And obviously, Utopia of the Seas features so much more than that. You know, one of my favorite spots to be on board Utopia of the Seas is Mason Jar. That's the Southern-themed restaurant. It's got like the fried chicken and the ribs and all the kind of the Southern-themed food, but also the bar has got the bourbon cocktails, and you know I like that. The country music band that's always playing, in many cases, deep into the night. Just a great experience. You'll love Utopia of the Sea. So whether it be one of these Georgia off weeks coming up this fall, or holiday travel, or travel in early 2025, start thinking about your chance to be on board Utopia of the Seas. Give my good friend Jessica Slater a call. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. I told y'all a couple of months ago I had a big travel issue unrelated to anything involving Royal Caribbean, but Jessica, just being kind of a travel expert and just being a kind person, she helped me out. She got me set straight, my whole family, and she followed up with us like 3 or 4 times to make sure we were okay. Like, really just confirming for me that if you use Jessica to book your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, you'll have the best possible experience, because I tell you, she took good care of my family in a pretty significant time of need for us, for things that had nothing to do with Royal Caribbean. She was great to us, and I just really, really appreciated all of that. All right, we're cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here right now. ESPN has its list of top quarterbacks out for the upcoming season. Interesting to note that Carson Beck is number 1 on this list. By now, we've kind of gotten used to that. And I think we've probably said all of our piece about whether Beck will, or what might prevent Beck from actually being the best quarterback in the country here this year. That's obviously one of those storylines for Georgia for the upcoming season. We're fascinated to watch play out. But can I give you a different twist on this topic here for a moment? Because here's what I also think is probably a discussion that maybe we haven't had enough. That in addition to Beck being the top quarterback, did you know that there are also 3 other Georgia opponents who show up on this list of top 10 quarterbacks there as well? You got Quinn Ewers at number 2. You got Jalen Milroe at number 3. You got Jackson Dart on this list there as well. That not only is Beck thought to be the best quarterback in football, but Beck will also be battling in Georgia's regular season schedule alone against 3 other top 10 national quarterbacks, if that's what turns out to be true here. And doesn't that kind of become interesting here? That Carson Beck is going to have a chance to showcase himself against other quarterbacks who are, in many ways, almost getting an equal level of attention. I mean, Quinn Ewers is featured in all these national ads and national campaigns. Jalen Milroe is obviously a guy that was in the college football playoff a year ago. Jackson Dart probably getting a little less attention, but he's going to be working with Lane Kiffin, so it won't take much for Jackson Dart to be in the national conversation, because people are sort of always fascinated by what Lane Kiffin is doing. So it becomes kind of an interesting kind of gunslinger set of matchups here, where Beck dueling it out with another big-time quarterback. That's going to be one of the real themes of this season. It's not just those 3 guys that I just mentioned. But by the time the game is played, the attention for Nico Iamaleava is going to probably be, kind of off the charts. Brock Vandagriff may have a chance to get his own level of attention there from Kentucky. There are a lot of very interesting quarterbacks, in other words, in the SEC here this season, and how Beck performs individually in comparison to all those guys could end up being a pretty interesting thing. This is not an SEC note, but it obviously impacts the SEC. It's not even really a sports note, but it obviously has tremendous impact on college football overall. Did you see that John Ruiz, the famous Miami booster, his company, one of the companies that he started, Life Wallet, is apparently in some real trouble here, like to the point where the company itself might not even be able to continue to exist. This has kind of been going on for a while. They were, I think, delisted from the NASDAQ going back, several months ago, and now things might even be getting worse, which is obviously going to make it tough for Ruiz to fulfill. You would presume anyway. I mean, obviously I can't, pretend to know this for sure, but one might presume that some of the NIL promises that Ruiz has made to Miami athletes might get a little tougher to keep those promises if the Life Wallet money is not flowing in the way that perhaps he thought it was initially. We'll see if that ends up being the case. But I want you to file a couple of things away here. Thing number 1 is this. One of the things we heard a lot about when NIL first got started is, what's going to stop a player from going to a school, agreeing to some NIL money, taking that money, and then transferring all the way back out again, as if the players were the ones you had to watch for potentially not fulfilling their end of the agreement. But if the Ruiz thing truly happens here the way that it appears that it might, and it's not obvious that it will, but if it does, where, he faces financial ruin, I guess that's no other way to say it, and he's not able to, pay some of these huge NIL things because they've spent major dollars on basketball and women's basketball, and it's not just football. They're throwing money around. If he can't do that, if he can't fulfill those payments promised, then you sort of put this in the same category of what Jaden Rashada alleges about Florida. There are some other pretty high-profile rumors that have been out there about so-and-so transferred to so-and-so school thinking he's going to get X number of dollars, and it just didn't happen, at least not to the level that he was told that it might. When it comes to who's living up to their agreements in NIL deals, I think the players get a bad rap. They're always accused of, well, they're going to take this NIL money, then they're going to transfer it right back out. But how many instances are there, or how many instances will there be of programs who bring a player in on some sort of wild promise only to not be able to match the dollars that were, perhaps promised? This Miami situation is probably worth following. And I'll say one more thing about this, and then we'll change the subject. This is the one thing I've kind of always cautioned as it relates to NIL, that when it comes to the future where it seems like we're going to have some sort of compensation model, I'm a little more pro-NIL than I am some of the other things that sometimes gets thrown around. And some of the craziness that people have kind of been concerned about as it relates to NIL. If you understand sort of basic market activity, the one thing you understand is if the market is crazy, then it won't stay crazy forever. Otherwise, it's no longer crazy. It's just, the way the market functions. But an example of, well, this Miami booster is throwing around these crazy sums of money. Well, if it is truly crazy, eventually it's going to stop, and that's going to bring sort of a stabilization to the market. That may be what's happening here, is that somebody who perhaps got out over their skis just a little bit, all of a sudden now not going to quite be able to be quite as aggressive anymore. And an example of slowly over time, a bit of a stabilization within NIL, making the market operate in a little bit more of an efficient way. We saw some wild stuff the first couple of years, but over the course of time, to my eyes anyway, there seems to be a little bit of a stabilization when it comes to NIL overall. And I think that's probably a good thing for college athletics, if that is indeed truly playing out. I saw something from Dabo Swinney that I thought was kind of interesting. I want to read this to you here for a moment there as well, which is that Dabo was kind of defending the fact that, Clemson's sort of a top 15 team, and obviously there's been some skepticism of, are we sure that's still what Clemson is? I want to read this quote from a recent Dabo Swinney press conference. He says, we're pretty consistent. I mean, we've had 13 years in a row where we've finished top 20 or top 15, some years top 5, top 10. We're pretty dang consistent, Swinney says. So, I mean, if you want to buy a stock, you want to buy one that's hot sometimes and then cold as a dead fish. Well, we're pretty steady. Second winningest team in the country past 13 years. We're pretty steady, pretty consistent, not perfect. We've had a little dip here or there, but over the long haul, we're pretty good stock. So I'd say exactly what I said. I'd invest in them Tigers. Here's the problem, and you already know this, that Swinney's looking at his entire tenure at Clemson as if it's sort of like one lump sum. But the actual truth is, if you look at the actual trend for Clemson, no doubt it's an arrow down, that there was a long stretch of Clemson being in the college football playoff that ended after the 2020 season. And since then, you've seen a dip in performance and then another dip in performance to the point a year ago that Clemson was just sort of average as best as a football team. Now, over the course of the entirety of Dabo Swinney's tenure there at Clemson, undoubtedly a very successful program. But how much of that is still left over? And that's not an irrelevant question in the eyes of Georgia fans, because this is the team that Georgia will begin its 2024 season against. But let me give you one more thought here very quick. Here's the thing I was sort of considering this morning driving in. Think about the last time Georgia played Clemson. Clemson was the favorite. Georgia was, in 2021, trying to show that it could play at Clemson's level. It won a hard-fought, low-scoring game that day. But consider what has happened since then. As I said before, Clemson hasn't been back in the college football playoff since that moment. Georgia's clearly won 2 national championships. But beyond that, consider this. Clemson will show up into Atlanta in a couple of weeks' time as a ranked non-conference Power 4 opponent for Georgia. Think about for a moment here what Georgia has done against ranked non-conference Power 4 opponents since it beat Clemson to begin the 2021 season. I'm talking about Orange Bowl playoff game against Michigan, an absolute blowout victory. Georgia could have beaten Michigan as bad as it wanted to that day. I'm talking about 49-3 against a very good Dan Lanning coached Oregon team to begin the 2022 season. The Ohio State semifinal game in the Peach Bowl, that was obviously close. The national championship against TCU, 65-7. Last year in the Orange Bowl, they beat Florida State by 10 touchdowns. It's amazing how dominant Georgia has been over the course of the last couple of years against non-conference Power 4 opponents ranked at the time the game was played. The relevant question for Georgia against Clemson is not whether or not Clemson can win the game. To be completely honest, the relevant question right now is, can Clemson even keep it close? Because Michigan couldn't, and Oregon couldn't, and TCU couldn't, and Florida State couldn't. Can Clemson? That's what Clemson's got to prove in Atlanta coming up in a couple of weeks. And that is cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. All right, I want to give a shout-out here really quick. Then I want to listen to something that Reese Davis from ESPN has said. How about our friends right now at Precision Garage Doors? You know, they take good care of you. If you kind of find yourself, you hear that noise, that bloop, 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 bloop noise as you bring down your garage door. It irritates all your neighbors, things like that. If that's one of the things you're dealing with, I want you to know my friends at Precision Garage Door, because they have truly earned a 5-star reputation for excellent service all across the Atlanta area every single day by providing on-time service, phones that are answered 24/7, and you can always get in touch with one of their garage door replacement repair specialists anytime that need arises there for you. They are DawgNation's choice to get that done, whether it's a simple repair job or a complete replacement of your current garage door. They're all about all of that. And just like we talk about 5-star recruits all the time, our friends at Precision Garage Door, as I said, a reputation for 5-star service, and those reviews online certainly prove all of that. And speaking of that service, you know, anytime you get some repair work done, they're going to waive that $29 service fee for you. Just one of the great ways they take good care of you. They're a neighborly company. You can find out more online at precisiondoorgeorgia.com. precisiondoorgeorgia.com for more on that. All right, as we get ready to wrap up here today, let us do our long finish now, brought to you by the Finnish Long Drink. And I want to look at something here for a moment that ESPN's Reese Davis recently said on the ESPN College Game Day podcast. Davis, the host of the Game Day TV show, making his case that at the end of the year, it'll be our Georgia Bulldogs who are the number 1 overall seed going into the college football playoff. This is what Reese Davis said about that this week.
My number 1 seed, SEC champion, University of Georgia.
A fine choice.
Georgia has a much more difficult schedule than Texas.
Correct.
They have to go to Texas to play. With Carson Beck coming back, with sort of the institutional success that Georgia has had as a football program, knowing how to win, probably a bit of frustration from last year because Michigan proved to be the best team because Georgia wasn't in the field. For most of the season, if not all of it, you could easily make the argument Georgia was the best team. They do have some holes to fill that they haven't in the past. The defensive line isn't full of surefire first-rounders as it has been in the past. But then again, neither is the defensive line from Texas.
So there's Reese Davis. Now, let me give you 2 quick thoughts on this. Thought number 1 is this. Ultimately, a lot of Georgia fans don't really care what guys like Reese Davis say about your team. Totally get that. But keep in mind, a year ago, we made a big deal about this at the time. Davis was all in on Michigan, and he at least turned out to be right in terms of the fact that Michigan won the national championship. So Davis, who got it right with Michigan a year ago, the fact that he's kind of in on Georgia right now, I don't know, maybe that's ended up, being kind of a good thing maybe as far as Georgia's concerned. But beyond that, it still kind of unearths in me the question that I've talked about already this week. Okay, well, maybe Georgia will be the number 1 overall seed. Maybe it wins the SEC. But what if it doesn't? What if the tough schedule just trips them up? They don't go undefeated. Maybe they don't make the SEC championship because of that, but they still make the college football playoff. Like, how much would Georgia be harmed if it isn't the top seed and if it isn't one of those top 4 seeds that earn the bye in the first round of the playoffs. I have a sneaking suspicion that we won't see the bye teams, the teams that skip past the first round, that don't play until the quarterfinals. I don't think we'll necessarily see them dominate the college football playoff. There'll be 4 of those games involving those 4 teams that earn byes. At the very least, we'll see at least one of the teams that plays in the first round win in the quarterfinals. I think we have a better chance of seeing the 2 teams from the first round go 2-2 as opposed to seeing the teams that earn the bye go 4-0 there. I gave you the number the other day. There have been 7 wildcard teams that have won the Super Bowl, meaning they've had to play all the weekends of the NFL playoffs. The teams that get a bye in the divisional round have about a 67% winning percentage playing in that, about a 670 winning percentage. And I think college football may work out to be somewhat similar, where I think it's good to have the bye, but it's not necessarily a guarantee of any kind of win or anything like that. But obviously Reese Davis thinks that Georgia might be able to get that nonetheless. We'll make that our long finish here, presented by the Finnish Long Drink. And don't forget, right now, your chance to register for your opportunity to win the Sip and Swing golf outing giveaway that we're doing courtesy of our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. When you go on the X platform or on Instagram, use the hashtag Sip and Swing, you're entered for your chance to win a round of golf with DawgNation. That's me, one of the DawgNation folks around here there as well. Just simply go to Instagram or X, use the hashtag Sip and Swing. We're going to play in September, having a great time there at the Iron Horse Golf Club and enjoying all of that fun. And of course, it'll be September 25th is the date all of that is going to go down. So we've got this contest running between now and the end of the month. Use the hashtag Sip and Swing for your chance to win. We'll play golf together maybe if you do win there on September 25th. Fun round of golf there at Iron Horse and all kinds of refreshments brought to you by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. So make sure you enjoy all of that today. And, of course, it's great to have the Finnish Long Drink, bringing the long finish to us as we wrap up a week here on DawgNation Daily. And as we say goodbye to you, speaking of that Sip and Swing contest, let's give you a couple of examples of submissions we've gotten as a part of our Golden Shoes here today. We'll show you the first one on the screen here for a moment. Seth Rhodes sharing this, saying, I ran out of Finnish Long Drink, so I had to settle for some bourbon, he says. The Finnish Long Drink koozie I got from DawgNation Daily tell-all. I'd seen a lot of action and a constant golf course friend. I love that, Seth. He's having a great time, and he used the hashtag Sip and Swing. That's the kind of fun we're going to be having together, whoever wins, coming up on September 25th. So we love Seth's participation in all of that. We'll give him a golden shoe for his efforts there on that. Also, another golden shoe going out for a similar reason to Brian Whitehead. How about this? A couple of dog fans enjoying some Georgia football together. Brian there looks great. They've got the Finnish Long Drink going. That looks like a lot of fun there. That's awesome to be able to see from Brian Whitehead. He used the hashtag Sip and Swing. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Also, another golden shoe going out to our buddy Chief Big Dog here at UGA Good on the X platform. He's enjoying the peach-flavored version of the Finnish Long Drink. He gives us the hashtag Sip and Swing. You love to see that. And then finally, one more golden shoe here today. Obviously, we're kind of in the aftermath of the Olympics, but looking back to it, Georgia on tap saying that Kirby's going to be on the phone checking out this guy's eligibility. Who is it? It's one of those big weightlifter types from the Republic of Georgia. Maybe you're looking good in a University of Georgia football uniform. Perhaps that's the case. Georgia on tap will give you a golden shoe there as well. Lousy, stinking Gators, we got nothing for you but misery and another beatdown coming later on this season. And a look back at 1,378 days of the Dogs being on top when it comes to this great rivalry. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great weekend. I'll see you this weekend on Peachtree Sports Network and Peachtree TV for the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic. And, of course, back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. That was an old school long one today. We haven't done a real long one like that in a while, but we were a little lengthy on the broadcast here today. But we'll dive in here now. We'll get your comments via our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And I hope all of you are getting ready for a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And if you have time to tune in and watch us on some high school football this weekend, we would love that there as well. Spencer Clark giving a shout out to Gunnar Stockton. I tell you, I continue to be a fan of Gunner's game. I like what he brings to the table. I think the Gunner's still got a very bright future at Georgia. I know there's a lot to like about, Ryan Puglisi's arm strength, and obviously Jaden Rashada comes over to UGA with some credentials, but my expectation is that Gunner Stockton will still be Georgia's backup quarterback. That's my expectation there on that. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, about time I start on YouTube. I thought we started yesterday, didn't we? Foster Moss, thank you. He says, I can't wait to see you on TV tonight. I appreciate that, Foster. Thank you very much. Colby Strader says, my dad, Victor Strader, ran into his old friend Lindsey Scott in town earlier this week. Lindsey is pumped for the season. Run, Lindsey. I love that. I've had a chance to meet Lindsey a couple times. Great guy. Love, obviously, his tremendous contribution to Georgia football. What a special thing that is. UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says, Gunner's throwing the long drink. I mean, the ball on a rope. Hey, listen, he can toss us a long drink, too, if he wants to. I like that. Let's see what else. Texas Dog says, this is my 50th year as a dog fan. That's exciting stuff, Texas. Good stuff. And by the way, we're glad to have Texas Dog now living in the great state of Georgia once again there, too, which I'd love to see. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark says Georgia Tech might put a whipping on Clemson. I haven't done a whole lot of this yet. I think the Tech-Florida State game could maybe be interesting, maybe, right? That's next Saturday, I believe. That could be a lot of fun. Let's see what else. Daniel Nelson says, is it bad that I want Florida State to lose? Listen, you're well within your rights to, I guess, have whatever you like. Greg Rosenberg, a little skeptical of Justice Terry's likelihood of ending up at UGA. I mean, listen, I guess anything's possible, but I would say the current chatter behind the scenes is pretty positive for George and Terry, it seems like. But, I mean, it is just fair to say anything that sort of is going to stay like an open, unresolved issue between now and December obviously leaves room for something to happen. That's certainly true. Spencer Clark says that his Stanley Pritchett played with his brother at Douglas. Yeah, Coach Pritchett's a great guy and a sharp coach. And I tell you this, man, I know he loves that Douglas program. He's an alumnus from there. And he's really done some great things to turn that program around. I think they're going to be majorly heard from in 3A this year. They got a really impressive win against LaGrange on Wednesday night. I love what Stanley Pritchett is doing at Douglas. Jack Fullerton says that he thinks that NIL is such a waste of character building. I see it like offering alcohol in elementary school. I sort of get some of this, and I do take the character building part of football very seriously. But I don't believe that the character building can't occur if there's the presence of NIL. I just don't. Now, what I do believe is that players see a value in college football that is more than just monetary. In other words, if I became like king of the world, dictator, autocratic power, which is obviously my aspiration, if I possessed that kind of power and I said there is no longer any compensation of any kind allowed in college football, none of the current players would stop playing. They just wouldn't. And if the program said, hey, not only do we think that we have such a valuable product that we want you to play for free, we want you to pay us to play. If you completely reverse this and force the players to pay to play college football, many of them would still try to find a way to do that because they view the experience of playing college football as pretty valuable. So that's the thing I think always gets sort of misunderstood, is that college football as it has been is not exactly the free market, but it is a free choice, a choice whether to play or not. And players would, for the most part, play if they got paid or not. But that being understood, the presence of NIL, I don't think, changes the opportunity to grow and develop. I think there are some people who do shortchange the value of college football as a growth and development opportunity. And the fact that some people like it because it kind of presents as that. I think that people kind of misunderstand that sometimes. But I don't think the presence of NIL completely upends the opportunity to grow and develop. Spencer Clark, I didn't realize this. He says, he's talking about Stanley Pritchett was the number one pitcher in the state once, even over Quincy Carter. He was scared of surgery. The Braves won it. That's really interesting, Spencer. I didn't realize that. G. Grace also pointing out that week 1 game for Florida against Miami. That's a fascinating football game. It really is. Really is. Florida schedule, as we've said before, this is maybe the most difficult schedule anyone's ever played. So much so that you would almost look at a game like Miami as one of the games you have a chance to win. Which is obviously, if Miami is your easy game, then your schedule itself is incredibly daunting, and Florida's definitely is. Oh, Spencer Clark, he's talking about his brother. Okay, Stanley Pritchett was obviously a guy who played in the NFL, but he's talking about his brother was a big-time pitcher. Spencer, that's really interesting. Really very interesting. Stick D says, how many yards do you believe that Nate Frazier is going to have in the season opener against Clemson? I think he's going to be a big part of the game plan. Does he have a chance to go for 100 yards or something like that? I guess it sort of depends on how many yards his longest carry ends up being. But that's sort of the thing that Frazier can do for you. It's like, making somebody miss and turning what could be a 5 or 10 yard gain into something much larger than that. So the more interesting question might be how many yards does he average per carry? And if he does get the one big carry, because he just sort of make something explosive happen, then maybe he does make a push for a decent rushing total for that game. Let's get some comments here at DawgNation.com. Let's see what else. Yeah, Richard D is also kind of talking about that as it relates to Frazier. SEM Dog says, kind of a little bit like I said a moment ago, I can see him breaking a long run against a worn-out defense. Think about like what Nick Chubb would have done in the past. If that's a guy you're kind of bringing in as a little bit of a change of pace at the running back spot, then and I think he'll be more than that, by the way. I think he's going to play in the first. I think that Frazier's one of those guys that's going to play in all 4 quarters, at least based on what we're hearing right now. But as the defense gets tired, obviously a player like Frazier gets more and more dangerous. I don't think there's any doubt that's true. B. Max says he enjoys watching the Little League World Series. Yeah, always kind of a good time. Let's see what else. Savannah Bryant says, Reese David said back in 2022 that the penultimate college football playoff ranking showed that the Dogs would roll through the playoff to win back-to-back titles. Not sure we rolled through the Buckeyes, but he was close. Yeah, so Reese, I guess, has gotten some stuff right. We gave him a real hard time last year about being so all-in on Michigan. We thought that was disrespectful to Georgia. As it turns out, at least from the standpoint that Michigan did win the national title, I guess Davis was to a degree right about that. Randy Hall's predicting 5 sacks for Georgia against Clemson. Boy, I'd love to see that. Ken Holcomb says so many reasons to want that playoff bye, though, especially the injury possibilities and the possibility of losing the game you get to skip. Yeah, I guess my feeling on that is, look, and I get what you're saying, right? I mean, if you had the choice, you'd probably want it. I just don't know that. I don't know that it's going to necessarily prove to be all that much of a difference maker between who wins the national championship and who doesn't. Injuries could happen in the extra game you have to play, but injuries can also happen at any point in time. And, when it comes to losing that game, as long as you're like the 5, the 6, the 7 seed, you're still probably playing at home in a game that you're a significant favorite in. Now, upsets do occur, and obviously it could happen. My guess is we probably won't see very many of those. If I had to guess, we're just going to probably not see very many of those highly favored teams that just missed out on winning their conference lose to group of 5 team, sort of second best team from the Big 12, second best team maybe from the ACC. That's sort of who that's going to be, or 4th or 5th best team from your own, or 3rd or 4th best team from your own conference. All of this is obviously speculation because we haven't seen this play out. Yeah, but that's my best guess is that I don't know that you're going to see teams break their necks try to be the top 4 seeds. I just don't think you're going to see that. I think that being the 2 or the 3 from your own conference and the 5 or the 6 or maybe the 7 seed in the playoff overall, I think for some teams that may end up being kind of an okay spot to be in. JP says a playoff game in Athens would be insane. Yeah, putting aside the what's the best path towards a national championship, I can tell you this, that across college football right now, there is a ton of excitement about the chance to host a college football playoff game. So much so that if we think about a future playoff format that's different than the current one, more chances for home teams to play in their own stadium, for playoff teams to host playoff games in their own stadium, I think that's what people obviously really want. And I just think at Sanford Stadium it'd just be an incredible experience, I think. Just an incredible experience. BMAC, though, says if Georgia's in the SEC championship game, I hope they're not hosting a playoff game because obviously if you're hosting that playoff game, it means you did lose there on that. Let's see what else. Let's go to Facebook here for a moment. On Facebook, I think what I'm trying to say about that is I really think the overwhelming theme for the upcoming season is going to be even if you lose, and even if you lose a couple of times, not just Georgia, but everybody, even if you lose, and even if you lose a couple of games, you are still very much in it. This is about to feel a lot more like professional football, where, to the dismay of some, the pain of a regular season loss is going to be much less. It's just going to be much less. And I think it'll be interesting to see if fan conversation catches up with that, because obviously when Georgia loses, in the rare event that happens, our show on Monday is like just a tragedy. I mean, it's just, we obviously treat losses like a tragedy because they happen so infrequently and they're usually backbreakers when they occur. If Georgia loses a game this year, I think the proper conversation after that game, these are famous last words because this almost certainly won't be the case, but the conversation on a Monday morning after that game, I think, is supposed to be just a little bit more measured. Now, we'll see if it actually plays out that way. But that, I think, is the way that's supposed to be. Let's see what else. William Camacho hoping to see Rome back playing again. Yeah, I believe they probably will be. I know that they're still out of an abundance of caution not playing tonight, but I believe they probably will be. Miriam Corbin says if we get a playoff game in Athens, Josh Brooks needs to make those fireworks happen. Miriam, I love that. Philip Jordan Wells and Jacob O'Neill talking about Douglas. Yeah, this is year 4 coming up for Pritchett. They won like 2 or 3 games in the first couple of years. They were 6-5 last year, made the playoffs, and perhaps even far better than that here this year. Philip Carroll says the early trip to Lexington against Vandergrift could be a sneaky contest. Kentucky is notorious being a great first half of the season squad, yet playing that game so early in the season is also pretty interesting for Georgia. Doug Rayburn says, are you coming to Carrollton to call a game this year? Doug, I certainly hope that's the case. One of my favorite places to visit, and obviously a fascinating Carrollton team, both in terms of what they have had. I know they've had some nice transfers coming into the program too. Peyton Zachary is a receiver I really like. He's at Carrollton now, so I'm hoping we get a chance to see Carrollton for sure. Matt Rukavina says, never forget, B.A. Desmond Howard blocked me for calling him out when he made excuses for Alabama losing to us in the title. He's a crybaby. So there you go, Matt Rukavina. Very funny stuff. Very funny indeed. Jamie Huff says, Nate Frazier is the most talented running back on the team, period. So there you go from Jamie Huff, a strong take from him. Joseph Kennedy also mentioned the fact that Jamon Dumas-Johnson will be on the other side for the Kentucky defense. Bill Sanders predicts a big season for Peach County coming up. Obviously, no stranger to great success, and I know they've been, coaching changes there where, Coach Westbrook hopped over from Warner Robins to go there to Peach County, kind of an interesting move. And obviously they're in Fort Valley, one of the toughest teams in the state, typically speaking. All right, we're going to get ready to wrap things up. Let's do one more trip around each of the comment sections before we say goodbye. Lance D. on the subject of the Buford curse, very funny. Alex Lundeen. Tonight we've got Cass and Callaway. Really looking forward to that. Obviously, the Milton Buford game is going to be a terrific one. We don't have that one on our broadcast channel tonight, though. Jonathan Aaron talking about how, like, if you don't have the time and the money to attend the camps that a lot of recruits go to, how do you elevate your star rating? Well, I mean, I think even the folks in the industry will tell you that if you're not out there on a regular basis, your star rating's going to probably suffer from that. Probably that's the case. Now, if you're doing big things on a Friday night, you're going to still get noticed. But if you're not traveling around and doing a lot of the camps, the evaluators can only evaluate what they see. And if they're not seeing you in person, they're not getting a chance to do that. Now, that may seem to a certain degree unfair, but I guess that's better than the alternative of trying to sort of fictitiously rate players they're not getting a chance to see there in person. So, and we see this from time to time, especially in kind of the rural parts of, like, think about a southern state like a Mississippi or somewhere like that, where oftentimes in remote areas, those players are not coming to camps. They're not doing stuff like that. And every now and then, it doesn't happen as much anymore because just the scouting evaluations and the searching for players has probably gotten a little bit more thorough. But it used to be, even a couple of years ago, you could see a player come from a very rural area sort of out of nowhere and become a much better player than you thought he would be because, he just didn't go to camps and just wasn't scouted at all. So if you're not attending those camps, if that's a financial hardship for you, you're probably going to your star rating's going to probably suffer some because of that. Colby Stratter on the subject of alternate uniforms. He'd love to see black pants. I mean, listen, I don't know if they'll ever do black pants, but they got the perfect chance to do the black jerseys on Tech on that Friday night. Now, we'll see if they actually do that. But it's that funny thing where you see all the alternate jerseys, all the recruiting photos all the time, and obviously we know that Georgia just never wears them during a game. But I know there are a lot of Georgia fans who would certainly like to see them, so we'll see if they do that. Taylor Russell, thank you for the kind words. I truly appreciate that. Thank you very much. Johnny Surf Dog says Kirby doesn't get to complain about depth after signing 8 top 3 recruiting classes in a row. Yeah, I think you're probably right, Johnny. Not very many of his coaching colleagues want to hear much from him on that. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy, very funny stuff on Mark Stoops. Anything back here at DawgNation.com before we say goodbye? Richard D says, will Mikhail, Malachi, or who show out against Clemson? Listen, I'd love for it to be Mikhail. I tell you who I'd love for it to be, too, is Damon Wilson. That's a guy I'd love to see have a big game for Georgia right out of the box. That'd be so good. Randy Hall asked about my son in baseball. Yeah, he's kind of found himself a new baseball team over there. Really excited about that and looking forward to, a fun year with his school there too. So yeah, he's all about that now. Trying to make that kind of stuff happen. All about that for sure. Let's see what else. All right, we're going to get ready to go here right now. Y'all have a great weekend. See you tonight on Peachtree Sports Network. Tomorrow we're on Peachtree TV for the games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And, of course, back here Monday reacting to whatever happens with the scrimmage, whatever rumors we hear about that, and everything else inching closer to the start of the 2024 season. Y'all have a great weekend. Check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. If you want to continue to enjoy these final couple of weeks before the season starts in the cool comfort of a house whose air conditioning system works the way that it's supposed to, get your unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at R.S. Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. They'll take good care of you on that. Get you tuned back up to factory fresh specs. And then, by the way, that's a huge issue all the way through the fall there as well. Or if your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace that for you the same day there as well. If you have an electrical issue or if you want to start thinking about your heating system ahead of the upcoming winter, just anything you need with as far as those major systems in your house, those things behind the walls that you can't really see. And for someone like me, most of the time you don't even think about. R.S. Andrews can help you out on all of that. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend. Back here Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.